Charles Peirce wrote that the relation of object and interpretant through the sign or feeling is a phenomenal manifestation of ourselves, just as a rainbow is at once a manifestation both of the sun and of the rain. The self is the sign relation, since feeling is meaningless unless it is interpreted as the sign of an object, as Peirce scholar James Hoops notes. How can this relate to a specific passage from John Milton's Paradise Lost? Remember that for Peirce, the object determined the sign, and meaningfulness is embodied feeling or action, which is Peirce's definition of thought. For Peirce, thought in this way contained the self. He wrote that we ought to say that we are in thought, and not that thoughts are in us. One must not take a nominalistic view of thought, as if it were something that a man had in his consciousness, he wrote to William James. It was we that are in it, thought, rather than it in any of us. So let's consider how to apply Peirce's model of environmental thought in making meaning to literature, using Timo Maren's model of the nature text, which is derived from Peirce. Maren's model seeks to provide a rubric to describe phenomenologically how a meaningful text can shape embodied meaning as thought in a relationship between text and environment that is the self. Some texts can do this better than others. Some texts are more binary, some are more triadic, in Peirce's sense of actually involving semiosis or meaning making in a dynamic way. Let's look at a passage from the end of Milton's Paradise Lost that for centuries has evoked meaning intensely for many readers, and try to see how this may all work. But remember, this is only one way of reading a text, but helpful in environmental literary criticism. We're going to look now at the concluding account of Adam and Eve leaving paradise. They looking back all the eastern side beheld of paradise so late their happy seat, waved over by that flaming brand, the gate with dreadful faces thronged and fiery arms. Some natural tears they dropped, but wiped them soon. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest, and Providence their guide. They hand in hand with wandering steps and slow, through Eden took their solitary way. How is this passage meaningful as embodied feeling that is thought, which in relating text and environment is ourself as a reader, according to Peirce and Maren? Overall, in describing the experiential component of this text in a phenomenological way, we read this passage and feel empathy for Adam and Eve, arguably. We mythopoetically experience their plight. The relation between the text and environment, in the largest sense of tradition and the earth, which I'll explain further in a minute, seeks to involve our very selfhood when we are moved by it. Ecopoetically, we can consider the environment in terms of overlay landscape. Here there is an overlay in terms of the geography of Eden, being the region outside of paradise, centered on the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This was often considered the cradle of human civilization on the earth as a whole. The overlay landscape comes out of a specific region, but is global also in applying to the earth. The world that lies before Adam and Eve is our own earth, and we ourselves physically can travel from where we are to Eden as the region that the poem describes. But the environment of a text can also be historical and social. Consider how this exile could also represent the loss of innocence, and the fall of the English Revolution. Part of the project of the poem was to be an English national epic, so the landscape also is woven into English historical geography. It was also considered historical, and in Milton's time, the Anglican Archbishop James Ussher had developed an English timeline for the date for creation and the fall. The text can be considered metonymically iconographic, that is, as physically based metaphorical discourse as well. In the verse, Eden is a place name belonging to a particular physical region again. The name also was thought to mean delight in Hebrew. We are oriented geographically by the eastern side of paradise. Paradise is a name that metonymically means garden in Greek. The text draws on the biblical book of Genesis for its framework, known from the King James Bible to Milton, translated from the Hebrew, and itself traditionally considered to have been written by Moses, himself considered an historical figure with a definite chronology. So the passage as a whole, as text, has a kind of metonymic shadow to it, or aura, in being embodied in chronology and geography. This relates also to the incarnational sense of word or logos in Milton's Christian tradition of textuality. In that tradition of textuality, the Bible was the Word of God related to the Word of God made flesh, and logos, with the meaning also of harmony, had, like music too, a physically embodied aspect. As the Bible texts were most often experienced orally and in church, in a community, but also in a sense iconographically related to the words of God in creation, which were also seen as a type of book, the book of nature. And perhaps we can think of that book of nature as a kind of cosmic illuminated manuscript. So in any case, each human life would have been seen as part of this text in a living sense. The human story considered that of the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve, to use C.S. Lewis's Narnian phraseology. Even the physicality of the text symbolically on the printed page can be considered in a sense metonymic in creation, as the pansemiotic or all-meaningful book of nature. Now, this also gets us to the interpretant, Peirce's third element, what Winfried Nerth has called the meaning, the purpose, the goal, the law, which can also be called the relationship, and Peirce sometimes called habit. Walker Percy called the interpretant the coupler of matter and words, the element of intersubjectivity. Timo Marin, in his nature text model, elaborates the interpretant as encompassing the formation of both author and reader in the making of meaning. Ecopoetically, as we've discussed, the author element can be thought of as tradition or memory, and the reader element in terms of timeplexity, or the experience simultaneously of different temporalities, different experiences of time, in which the reader is formed in the nature text, and which encourages a sense of experiencing empathy. So on the authorial side of Marin's model, the tradition or grounded ethos that is a given from the text's relation to environment is, of course, the biblical tradition of Genesis, as interpreted through the lens of Protestant Reformation Christianity in the 16th century, including the English Revolutionary period and Milton's own authorial persona and context. The passage here presents a sense of the exile of modern Anglophone individuals and the modern nuclear family in Milton's time, their placelessness and their hope for making it for success in a larger world of westernization. It presents a Protestant sense of individual responsibility and work ethic, perhaps, yet it still places Adam and Eve in the region of Eden, a place below paradise, but not completely severed from it, geographically at least, given the Christian belief in the incarnation, especially at a spiritual level. Perhaps the region of Eden can be seen as Miltonic England in what was supposed to be a kind of national as well as religious epic. Providence is still their guide. There is still a connection to the frameworks and lessons of the biblical tradition, as well as to that of Chaucer and Spenser, which A. Kent Hyatt, as we discussed, calls a mythopoeics of criticizing objectification both of others and of oneself. So, finally to the reader's timepexity. Peirce argued that some texts led themselves more to an active interpretant than others. The mythopoeic tradition of the Green World poetry we've been studying, according to Hyatt, emphasizes the experiential nature of the reader's implication in the nature text. In other words, it encourages that kind of active interpretant. The reader experiences this particular passage in a mythic primordial temporality of the Bible story, but also in the emerging modern historical time of Milton's era, and finally today in postmodern temporalities such as ecological, historicist, and cultural studies approaches to texts, and in our case, ecosemiotics. The reader interacts with the text and the author tradition and the environment and is formed in that interaction. This is what Peirce means by describing thought as embodied feeling, which is fundamentally environmental or ecological in being external to any interior isolated sense of self. The relation of text and environment can also be taken as that of the imaginative yet natural green world and the everyday world, and their interaction as described by Northrop Frye. The two can be flipped different ways in terms of culture and nature. But meanwhile, the author tradition and the reader's temporalities can be variously identified with text or environment, with nature or culture, with the everyday or the green world as well. But either way, the end result for Peirce of a fully actualized nature text is empathy, or agapasm, as he called it. This may be what Northrop Frye is trying to indicate in the green world as well, the back and forth between the two worlds, resulting in a lack of objectifying of one particular reality or one particular world over another. This also involves the values that Hyatt saw in the early English poetic tradition that we are studying, not objectifying yourself, not objectifying another. Such empathy is cited by mind philosophers as an important element in environmental experience. Is embodied empathy present in your own experience of this passage at the end of Paradise Lost? Why or why not? That's worth reflecting on in being descriptive of your own experience of the text in your own phenomenological way.